Amara Thompson's husband died 4 years ago. At least, that was what everyone believed. Since the day they buried his ashes, she had sent $300 every single month to her in-laws to pay off the debt he left behind. $300 that could have bought medicine for her sick mother, new shoes for her 4-year-old son, or simply a few hours of rest from the 2 jobs that were slowly killing her. She did it out of duty. She did it as her final act of love for a man she had mourned for 4 long years. Until one evening, Miss Pearl, the 80-year-old neighbor from the floor below, grabbed her wrist and pulled her aside. The old woman's eyes darted around nervously before she leaned in close and whispered, "Stop sending them money, child. Go look at the security camera footage. The new owner just installed them last month. You need to see what happens at 2 in the morning." Amara did not understand, but something in Miss Pearl's eyes, a mixture of pity and fear, made it impossible to ignore. The next night, she found a way to access the footage, and what appeared on that screen made her blood turn to ice. At 2:13 in the morning, a man with a limp unlocked the door to her in-law's apartment, using his own key, and walked inside as if he had done it 1,000 times before. She recognized that limp. She recognized those shoulders. She recognized the way he tilted his head. It was Derek, her husband, the man whose ashes sat in an urn at the church back home. If this story hooks you, smash that like button and share it with a friend. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss what happens next. Now, let us find out what Amara did when she realized her entire world was built on a lie, and what she discovered next would lead her straight into the arms of the most dangerous man in Chicago. Amara sat frozen in front of the screen, her eyes wide open yet no longer seeing anything at all. It felt as if every ounce of strength had been drained from her body, her arms and legs numb, her heart pounding so wildly she thought it might burst out of her chest. She pressed rewind and watched the video again, then again, for the 5th time, the 6th, the 7th. Each time, the image of the limping man became clearer, more familiar, more painfully undeniable. There was no mistaking it. The slight lean to the left from a knee injury in high school, the way his shoulders hitched upward whenever he walked faster, the habit of tilting his head to the right just before opening a door. It was Derek, her husband, the man she had cried herself dry over for 4 long years, the man whose ashes were enshrined in a small church back in their hometown in Indiana. Amara broke down, not in loud sobs, but in a strangled, suffocating sound trapped in her throat, as if someone were squeezing her neck tight. 4 years. How had she lived through 4 years like this? Memories came crashing back like a flood, dragging her under a sea of pain she had believed she had survived long ago. She remembered the day she was told Derek had died in an explosion at an oil field in North Dakota. His body burned beyond recognition, all that remained sent home in a white ceramic urn. She remembered collapsing onto the floor, clutching her 7-month pregnant belly, screaming until her voice was gone. She remembered the cold stare of her mother-in-law, Ruth, pointing straight at her during the funeral and accusing her of being the reason Derek had gone far away to earn money, only to lose his life on foreign soil. She remembered the debt of $14,400 her in-laws claimed Derek had borrowed to support his small family, a debt they said she was responsible for repaying, $300 every month, 4 years without pause. She had worked herself to exhaustion to make that money. Every day she woke up at 3:30 in the morning, took the bus to an office building in downtown Chicago to clean from 4 until 11. Then she rushed back to pick up Jaden from school, fed him, soothed him to sleep, and went straight to the convenience store for the night shift from 10 at night until 2 in the morning. She slept an average of 4 hours a day. Her hands were rough and cracked from cleaning chemicals. Her back ached constantly from bending down to scrub floors hundreds of times a day, but she endured it because she believed it was her final duty to her deceased husband, the only way to ensure Jaden could grow up without shame over his father's debt. And her mother, Gloria, 72 years old with a worsening heart condition, was waiting for surgery. Amara had no idea when she would ever be able to afford. Every night, after Jaden had fallen sound asleep, Amara would sit alone in the darkness, stare at their wedding photo, and whisper to Derek that she missed him, that she was doing her best, that she would raise their child well. But now, all of it suddenly felt like a cruel joke. He was still alive. He was still alive and slipping in and out of his parents' apartment at 2 in the morning like a ghost. He was still alive while she was slowly dying every day to repay what was supposedly his debt. Amara wiped her tears with the back of her roughened hand. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to calm down. No, she couldn't collapse here. She needed answers. She needed the truth. If Derek was still alive, why had he faked his death? Why were her in-laws still taking her money every month? Why had they pushed her and Jaden away, refusing to let their grandson visit them? Too many questions were swirling in her mind like a storm, and she knew that to get answers, she needed more than a single blurry video captured at 2 a.m. She needed the full footage. She needed proof, and she would uncover the truth, no matter how much it hurt. The next morning, Amara barely slept at all. She lay on the worn-out bed, eyes wide open, staring at the damp, stained ceiling, her mind spinning endlessly around the image of the limping man in the video. When the alarm rang at 3:30, she had already been awake for a long time. She woke Jaden earlier than usual, left him with a neighbor who agreed to watch him for a few hours, then went straight down to the security office on the ground floor of the building. The security office was a cramped little room, just big enough for a desk, a few surveillance monitors, and a middle-aged man yawning without restraint. Amara knocked, stepped inside, forcing herself to look calm even though her breath hitched in her constricted chest. She told the guard she wanted to review all the footage from the 5th-floor hallway cameras over the past month. The guard looked at her with suspicion and asked why. Amara lied, saying she suspected someone had broken into her apartment while she was working the night shift. The man scratched his head, clearly uncomfortable. He explained that the camera system had only been installed since last month, after the building changed ownership, and that all footage was not stored here but transmitted directly to the security company's monitoring center. If she wanted to see it, she would need permission from them directly. Amara asked which company it was. The guard opened a drawer, took out a business card, and handed it to her. Amara took the card and instantly felt the difference. It was unlike any business card she had ever seen. Pitch black like the night itself, thick and rigid like metal, with sharp silver embossed letters that read Castellano Security. Below was a phone number, no address, no email, no other information at all. Simple to the point of being frightening. A chill ran down Amara's spine. She had heard the name Castellano before. Who lived in Chicago and hadn't heard of that family? Rumors of an underground empire controlling half the city, of mysterious disappearances of anyone who dared to oppose them, of a ruthless young boss people called the King of the Night. Amara swallowed, her hand trembling slightly as she held the card. She knew she was stepping into dangerous territory, but the image of Derek in that video haunted her without mercy. 4 years. 4 years she had lived inside a lie. She needed the truth, no matter the cost. That evening, after feeding Jaden and putting him to bed, Amara sat on the old plastic chair in the corner of the kitchen, staring at the black business card. The clock on the wall read 9:45. She took a deep breath, then dialed the number on the card. The phone rang 3 times. Then a voice answered. Low, cold, commanding. A single word. Speak. Amara almost dropped the phone in shock. She steadied herself, her voice slightly trembling as she explained that she was a resident of the Parkview building on the south side, that she wanted permission to review security camera footage because she suspected something unusual connected to apartment 504 on the 5th floor. There was a long silence on the other end. Amara almost thought the call had been disconnected. Then the voice came back, still icy, yet carrying something that forced her to listen. Apartment 504. Interesting. Come to my office at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. The address will be sent by message. Don't be late. The call ended. Amara stared at her phone screen, the deafening thud of her pulse thundering in her ears. She didn't know who she had just called, but she knew one thing for certain. She had just stepped into a completely different world, and there was no turning back. Castellano Tower rose over the heart of Chicago like a monument to power and wealth. 52 floors of gleaming black glass reflected the morning sun, soaring so high that Amara had to tilt her head back to see the top. She stood on the opposite sidewalk, her hand gripping the strap of her worn-out handbag, feeling smaller and more out of place than she ever had before. Around her were men in expensive suits and women in high heels carrying designer bags, all moving with the easy confidence of people who belonged here. And her, in the simplest clothes she owned, looked like a dark ink stain on a sheet of pristine white paper. Amara took a deep breath and crossed the street. She didn't have time to be afraid. She had left Jaden with the neighbor, taken the morning shift off under the excuse of a medical appointment, and steeled herself for this meeting through a sleepless night. She had to do this. For herself, for her son, for 4 years of deception. The lobby of Castellano Tower was so vast that the sound of Amara's footsteps echoed as if she were walking through a massive cavern. The black and white marble floor shone so brightly she could see her own reflection. Dark wood-paneled walls, sparkling crystal chandeliers, abstract paintings that were probably worth more than her shabby apartment. Everything whispered a single word: power. She approached the reception desk, gave her name, and said she had a 9 o'clock appointment. The receptionist looked her up and down with a measuring gaze, then lifted the phone and made a call upstairs. A few seconds later, she nodded and gestured toward a private elevator at the end of the lobby. Floor 52. The elevator doors opened, and Amara stepped inside. There were no buttons, only a small camera in the corner of the ceiling and a facial recognition screen. The doors closed, and she felt the smooth upward motion carry her higher. 30 seconds later, the doors opened. Amara stepped into an entirely different world. This wasn't an office. This was a king's lair. The entire 52nd floor seemed to be a single vast space, with soaring ceilings and floor-to-ceiling glass walls overlooking all of Chicago. The city stretched beneath her like a miniature model, other buildings looking like children's toys from this height. The interior was minimalist yet extravagantly expensive, all shades of black, gray, and silver. And at the far end of the room, behind a massive ebony desk, sat a man. He was facing away from the door, looking out at the city below like an emperor surveying his kingdom. Amara didn't dare speak. She stood there, waiting, her heart pounding like a war drum. Then the chair slowly turned, and she saw him, Roman Castellano. Even in her wildest dreams, Amara couldn't have imagined a man like this. He looked about 36 or 37 years old, with sharp features as if carved from granite, a square jaw, a straight high nose, thin lips pressed into a cold, unyielding line. But the most terrifying thing was his eyes. Steel gray, deep and unreadable, holding no emotion she could grasp. They were the eyes of someone who had seen too much darkness and was no longer moved by anything. A faint scar ran from his left temple down across his cheekbone, a quiet reminder that this man had faced death and won. He wore a perfectly tailored black three-piece suit that hugged his powerful frame. No tie, the top 2 buttons open, revealing a glimpse of dark, discreet tattooing on his chest. Everything about him radiated danger, from the way he sat, to the way he watched, to the way he stayed silent. Roman didn't stand. He simply sat there, cold gray eyes sweeping over Amara from head to toe as if assessing an object. The silence stretched until it was suffocating. Amara felt like a rabbit frozen in front of a wolf, wanting to run but unable to move. Finally, he spoke. His voice was low and razor-sharp, cutting through the heavy silence the night before, but far more terrifying in person. Amara Thompson, 28 years old. Widow. 1 4-year-old son named Jaden, morning cleaning staff at the Morrison Building and night shift cashier at the Quick Stop convenience store. Biological mother Gloria Thompson, 72 years old. Heart disease, currently at St. Mary Nursing Home. For 4 years, you've sent $300 every month to Harold and Ruth Thompson at apartment 504 in the Parkview building. He paused, his gray eyes locking onto hers. Am I missing anything? Amara stood frozen. A paralyzing chill swept through her entire body. He knew everything. He knew her life, her family, her struggles, and she knew nothing about him beyond terrifying rumors. She had stepped into the den of a beast, and the door had slammed shut behind her. Amara wanted to turn around and run from this room, from this terrifying man, from everything that was happening, but her legs felt nailed to the floor. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to steady her breath, then spoke, her voice rough and strained from tension. You know everything about me, but I only want to know one thing. Who is the man in that video, and why does he have the keys to my in-laws' apartment? Roman studied her for a long moment, his gray eyes unblinking. Then he stood up. Amara instinctively stepped back. Roman was much taller than she had imagined, at least 1.85 meters, with broad shoulders and the solid build of a man accustomed to violence. He walked to an empty wall, touched an invisible point, and the entire wall suddenly lit up. It was a massive screen, stretching from floor to ceiling, displaying dozens of small frames from cameras scattered across the city. Roman tapped a few spots on the screen, and the other images vanished, leaving only the hallway footage from the 5th floor of the Parkview building. He spoke without turning to look at her. You want the footage? I'll show it to you. But I warn you, what you're about to see may destroy everything you've ever believed. Amara didn't answer. She just stood there, her eyes locked on the screen. Roman began playing the videos, not just one night, but many nights, dozens of nights over the past month, and in every clip, the limping man appeared. Some nights he came alone, unlocking the door with a key and disappearing into apartment 504 for hours. Some nights he arrived with another man, taller, close, cropped hair, dressed in a black leather jacket, carrying large bags with unknown contents. Some nights, Harold, her father-in-law, the man she had been told suffered from arthritis so severe he could barely walk, stepped out of the apartment moving perfectly fine, without a cane, without assistance, and drove off somewhere, only returning near morning. Each video was like a knife stabbing into Amara's heart. She had trusted them. She had cared for them. She had drained herself dry to send them money every month, believing they were two frail elderly people in need of support. But it had all been an act. Roman paused the footage on the image of the short-haired man in the leather jacket. He zoomed in on the man's face, and a file appeared beside it. Trevor Holt, 40 years old. Prior convictions for loan sharking and money laundering. Currently operating an underground network on my territory without permission. Roman's voice grew colder as he said it, as if someone daring to work on his land was an unforgivable insult. He turned back to Amara. I've been tracking Trevor Holt for 3 months. He uses multiple locations across the city for transactions and dirty money transfers. Your in-law's apartment, 504, is one of them. Amara's head spun. She had to grab the back of the nearest chair to keep from collapsing. Her voice trembled as she asked, "And the limping man, who is he? What does he have to do with Trevor Holt?" Roman looked at her, and for the first time, Amara noticed something flicker in those cold gray eyes. Not pity, perhaps curiosity, or something she couldn't name. "That's what I want to ask you." He stepped closer, stopping less than a single step away. She could smell the faint trace of expensive cologne on him, could feel the heat and danger radiating from his powerful frame. "You said your husband died 4 years ago. But you recognized the man in the video. You recognized his walk, the way he tilts his head. So tell me, Amara Thompson, who is your husband really? And why is a man who's supposed to be dead working for Trevor Holt's criminal operation?" Amara closed her eyes. Tears streamed down her cheeks and she didn't bother wiping them away. When she opened them again, her voice was no more than a broken whisper. "His name is Derek Thompson, my husband. The man I've mourned for 4 years. The man whose ashes are resting in a church back in our hometown in Indiana." She lifted her head and looked straight into Roman's eyes, her voice hardening. "And I need to know why he's still alive." Roman said nothing more after Amara confirmed the identity of the man in the video. He simply studied her with unreadable gray eyes, then lifted his phone and spoke a few short sentences in Italian. Less than 10 minutes later, the elevator doors opened and 2 people stepped out. One was a man around 34 years old, tall and powerfully built, his face cold as ice, with neatly cropped black hair and sharp eyes that constantly scanned his surroundings. Roman introduced him as Marco Visconti, his right-hand man. The other was a young woman around 30, petite in build, with long black hair tied high, round-framed glasses, and a backpack filled with electronic equipment slung over her shoulder. Her name was Nina Chen, the technology specialist of the Castellano organization. Roman looked at Amara and spoke in a tone that allowed no refusal. "You said your husband's ashes are in a church back in your hometown in Indiana. We're going to check right now. Marco and Nina will go with you. I need solid proof before I take the next step." Amara wanted to ask why he was helping her, why he cared about any of this, but she didn't dare. She only nodded and followed Marco toward the elevator. The drive from Chicago to the small town of Riverside in Indiana took about 2.5 hours by car. Marco drove a sleek black SUV. Nina sat in the front passenger seat, and Amara sat in the back, staring out the window without really seeing anything. She hadn't returned to this place since Derek's funeral. 4 years ago, she had stood in that small church, heavily pregnant, tears pouring down her face, her hands shaking as she placed a white bouquet on the altar where the white ceramic urn rested. She remembered the scent of candles, the smell of lilies, the aged wood of the church pews. She remembered the priest's somber voice reciting prayers. She remembered Ruth's cold hand gripping hers, not in comfort but in restraint, as if holding her there so she couldn't escape the debt. The car stopped in front of St. Michael Church close to 1 in the afternoon. The church looked exactly as Amara remembered. A small red brick building with a moss-covered bell tower, nestled among rows of old oak trees. Amara stepped out of the car, her legs slightly unsteady. Marco walked beside her like a silent shadow, while Nina carried her equipment backpack. Inside, the church was quiet and cool. Afternoon light filtered through stained glass windows, casting colors over rows of empty wooden pews. Amara walked straight toward the small altar on the left, where urns were kept in individual glass compartments. She found Derek's urn immediately, a white ceramic urn with his name engraved in gold letters. Derek James Thompson, born 1991, died 2021. Amara stood there, staring at the urn, and suddenly every emotion from the past 4 years crashed over her like a tidal wave. How many times had she come here during the first year after Derek died? How many times had she cried in front of this urn, whispering that she missed him, that she would raise their child well, that she would pay off his debt? How many bouquets had she placed? How many candles had she lit? How many prayers had she said for the soul of a man she now knew might still be alive? Nina stepped up beside Amara, her voice gentle but professional. "I need to open the urn to check. Do you consent?" Amara nodded, unable to speak. Marco looked around to make sure no one was there. Then Nina carefully opened the lid of the ceramic urn. She pulled a small device from her backpack, shaped like a pen, inserted it inside, and scanned. A few seconds later, results appeared on the small screen. Nina looked at Amara, her eyes holding a compassion Amara hadn't expected from someone who worked for the Mafia. "Miss Thompson, there are no human ashes in this urn, only sand and crushed limestone." Amara heard nothing after Nina's words. A loud ringing filled her ears, her mind spinning as if someone had struck her head with a hammer. Sand and crushed stone, not ashes. 4 years. For 4 years she had knelt before that urn, cried until she had no tears left, whispered love and longing to a handful of lifeless sand. Her legs gave out. She collapsed in front of the altar, both hands clutching the edge of the wooden table like a drowning person clinging to the last piece of driftwood. Her sobs burst into the stillness of the church, echoing against the moss-covered stone walls like the wail of a betrayed soul. It wasn't loud weeping. It was a silent scream torn from the deepest part of her heart, the sound of someone whose entire world had just been ripped away. She remembered the first time she came here, 1 week after the funeral. Her belly had already been so large then, Jaden kicking constantly inside her as if he too could feel his mother's pain. She had hugged the cold ceramic urn to her chest, crying until she couldn't breathe, telling Derek that their son was about to be born, asking if he could hear her, if he could feel the baby kicking, asking why he had left them like this. She remembered the sleepless nights after work when Jaden was still a newborn who cried through the dark hours. She would hold her child in her arms, stand before Derek's photograph and the fake urn she had brought home from the church and placed on the small altar in their apartment, whispering that she was exhausted, that she didn't know how much longer she could endure, but that she would keep going. For him, for their son. She remembered every time she sent money to her in-laws, she would stop by here, place a flower before the urn, and tell Derek that she was close to paying off his debt, asking him to rest in peace, promising she would take good care of his parents. How many times? How many flowers? How many tears? All of it poured out for an empty urn, for a man who was never dead, for a perfectly staged lie meant to deceive her. Marco stood motionless like a statue, but Amara could sense his unease at the sight. Nina knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder, saying nothing, simply staying there in quiet solidarity. Amara cried until there were no tears left. She cried for 4 years of meaningless sacrifice. She cried for nights of working until collapse. She cried for meals scraped together in poverty. She cried for hands roughened by chemicals. She cried for her sick elderly mother she couldn't afford to treat. She cried for her young son who had grown up in hardship because she had sent money to repay the debt of an unworthy father. And she cried for herself, for the naive 24-year-old woman who had believed in love, believed in family, believed in promises, only to be betrayed with a cruelty that cut to the bone. When Amara lifted her head, her eyes were no longer the eyes of a weak widow resigned to fate. They were the eyes of a woman burned by the truth, and from those ashes, a new fire was rising. A fire of fury, of resolve, of hunger for justice. She stood up, wiped her tears with the back of her roughened hand, and looked straight at Marco. Her voice was hoarse but steady. "Take me back to Roman Castellano. I need to know the whole truth, and I need him to pay." They returned to Chicago as the afternoon faded toward evening. Amara sat in silence throughout the drive, her eyes fixed on the window, yet seeing nothing at all. In her mind there was only one thought: the truth. She needed the whole truth, no matter how painful it was. Marco drove her straight to Castellano Tower. This time, when she stepped into the office on the 52nd floor, Amara felt no fear. Pain had burned every trace of fear out of her, leaving behind only a cold emptiness and a fierce need to know everything. Roman was standing in front of the glass wall, his back to her, looking out at the city as the lights slowly came alive in the dusk. When he heard Amara's footsteps, he turned. His gray eyes passed over her swollen face, still marked by tears, but his granite-hard features remained stoic. He gestured toward the black leather chair in front of the desk. "Sit down. You need to hear what I'm about to say." Amara sat, her back straight, her hands gripping the sides of the chair. Roman didn't sit. He stood across from her, leaning against the edge of the desk, his arms crossed over his chest. His voice was low and even, as if he were reading a report, but every word cut into Amara's heart like a blade. Derek Thompson didn't die in an explosion at an oil field in North Dakota 4 years ago. There was no explosion at all. It was all staged. Roman activated the large screen on the wall, revealing a flood of documents, photographs, and diagrams. "Before going to North Dakota, your husband had gambling debts in Chicago. He'd been addicted to gambling since he was young, but he hid it from you very well. When he worked at the oil field, instead of sending money home, he kept gambling, and he lost. He lost badly." The image shifted to a photograph of Derek sitting in an underground casino, surrounded by men with cold, hardened faces. He owed a Detroit gang $60,000. That's not the kind of people who let you pay in installments and forget about it. They would have killed him if he didn't pay, so he came up with a plan. He faked his death. Roman scrolled through more files. He bribed an oil field employee to create a false accident report. He bought fake ashes from an illegal cremation facility. He sent them back to his parents and disappeared. The Detroit gang believed he was dead, so they stopped hunting him. And you received the urn and a debt of $14,400 that your in-laws claimed he had borrowed to support his family. Amara clenched her teeth, her nails digging deep into her palms. She had suspected it, but hearing it confirmed from Roman's mouth still left her gasping in pain. "Was that debt real?" she asked, her voice hoarse. Roman shook his head. "No, there was no debt at all. Your in-laws made it up to take money from you. $300 a month for 4 years, more than $14,000 in total. And that wasn't all." He switched the screen to a complex diagram filled with arrows and blocks. After faking his death, Derek secretly returned to Chicago. He couldn't live openly because he feared the Detroit gang would find him, but he needed money, so he partnered with Trevor Holt. Trevor's image appeared on the screen, accompanied by a detailed profile. Trevor Holt runs a loan sharking and money laundering operation. He needs people who don't exist, people with no identity, no records, nothing the police can trace. Derek was perfect. He's worked for Trevor for 3 years now, collecting money from debtors, threatening those who fall behind, and sometimes doing even dirtier work. Amara felt nauseous. The man she had once loved, the man who had sworn to protect her, who had promised her a happy life, now appeared as a complete stranger, a liar, a criminal, a monster wearing a human face. "And his parents?" she asked, even though she already knew the answer. Roman looked at her, and for the first time, Amara noticed something flicker in his cold gray eyes, perhaps respect for a woman who could still ask clear questions while being crushed by the truth. Harold and Ruth Thompson knew their son was alive from the beginning. They were accomplices in the entire scheme. Their apartment was one of the transfer points for Trevor's dirty money network. Derek came there every night not just to see his parents, but to move money and report his work. The money you sent every month went partly into their pockets, and partly to Derek. Amara closed her eyes. The full picture formed before her, sharp and merciless. 4 years of working herself to death to send money to people who were laughing at her behind her back. 4 years of believing she was fulfilling her duty to a dead husband, while he was alive and spending her money. 4 years of thinking her in-laws were 2 fragile old people in need of care, while they were accomplices in a calculated fraud. 4 years of sacrificing everything for a family that betrayed her without hesitation. Why? Her voice was nothing more than a broken whisper. Why did they do this? What did I do wrong? I loved them. I treated them like my own family. Why? Roman was silent for a moment, then answered in a voice as cold as steel, carrying a brutal truth. Because you were easy to deceive. Because you were kind. Because you believed in people, believed in love, believed in family. And there are predators in this world who hunt people like you, people with warm hearts and eyes that don't see evil. He stepped closer, stopping right in front of her, looking down at her with those deep gray eyes. But now you know the truth. The question is, what are you going to do with it? Amara looked at Roman, her eyes red and swollen, yet lit with a resolve she never imagined she could still possess after everything that had happened. What was she going to do? She wanted Derek to pay. She wanted his parents to pay. She wanted every single cent they had stolen from her returned. But who was she? A poor widow, a cleaner and cashier, living in a damp apartment in the South Side slums. What did she have to stand against a criminal network? Roman seemed to read her thoughts. He turned toward his desk, poured a glass of amber whiskey from an expensive bottle, then came back and offered it to her. Amara shook her head and refused. Roman shrugged, took a sip himself, then spoke in a low, even voice. You can't do anything on your own. You know that. I know that. But I can help you. Amara frowned, watching him with suspicion. She wasn't naive enough to believe a mafia boss helped anyone without a reason. Why? What do you get out of this? Roman set the glass down, his gray eyes locking onto hers without blinking. Trevor Holt is operating on my territory without permission. He's using buildings I own to launder dirty money. That's an insult I won't ignore. I've been watching him for 3 months, but I haven't had enough evidence to take down the entire operation. You can help me do that. He stepped closer, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. You have access, I don't. You're Harold and Ruth's daughter-in-law. You can go into that apartment without raising suspicion. You can collect evidence from the inside. And when we have enough proof, we'll bring it all down. Trevor, Derek, his parents, all of them will pay. Amara stayed silent. She understood exactly what Roman was offering. An alliance. A deal between a penniless widow and a mafia boss. She would become his piece on the board, and in return he would help her get revenge. It was a deal with the devil, and she knew it. But what other choice did she have? She could go to the police, but with what she now knew about Derek and Trevor, they'd disappear before the authorities could act. She could confront them herself, but that would only put her and Jaden in danger. And if she did nothing at all, she'd have to live the rest of her life knowing the people who betrayed her were still out there, perhaps laughing at her innocence. If I agree, Amara said at last, her voice slow and careful. I have conditions. Roman leaned back, folding his arms across his chest, one corner of his mouth lifting slightly as if he found it amusing that a small woman like her dared to set terms with him. Go on. Amara took a deep breath. First, you can't kill Derek. I know you're Mafia, and you can do whatever you want. But Derek is my son's father. No matter what kind of man he is, I don't want Jaden to grow up thinking his mother caused his father to be killed. I want him alive. Alive in prison. Alive to remember every day what he's done. Death is too easy for him. Roman studied her for a long moment, his gray eyes unreadable. Then he nodded. Fine. The second condition. Amara continued, her voice steadier now. Second, you have to protect my son. Jaden is only 4 years old. If this turns dangerous, if Trevor or Derek find out and want revenge, I need to know my child will be safe. I can endure anything, but not Jaden. This time, Roman didn't answer right away. He looked at her differently now, not entirely cold anymore. Something flickered in his gray eyes, something Amara couldn't name. Perhaps respect, or perhaps a memory she knew nothing about. You're a good mother, he said, his voice deeper. Your conditions are accepted. Your son will be protected as if he were blood of the Castellano family. I give you my word. Amara nodded, feeling part of the weight lift from her shoulders. But she knew she had just stepped into a world she didn't understand. She had just shaken hands with a mafia boss, placing her fate and her son's life in the hands of a man she had met less than a day ago. It was madness, but it was also the only thing that made sense in the shattered world she was living in. Roman extended his hand. So we have a deal. Amara looked at his large, calloused hand. A hand that had done things she didn't want to imagine. The hand of a killer, a crime boss, a king of the night, but also the only hand being offered to her in that moment. She took it. We have a deal. That very night, Roman arranged for Amara and Jaden to leave their old apartment in the Parkview building. He said staying there was far too dangerous, because Derek and Trevor could discover she was investigating them at any moment. Marco arrived to pick them up at 10 o'clock at night, when Jaden was already asleep in Amara's arms. She managed to pack only a few changes of clothes and essential items into a small suitcase. Looking back at the shabby apartment where she had lived for 4 years, Amara felt no regret. That place held too much pain, too many sleepless nights, too many tears. She turned her back and walked away without looking back. The black SUV cut through the city at night and finally stopped in front of a luxury building in the Gold Coast, one of the wealthiest areas in Chicago. Amara stepped out, her eyes widening as she stared at the brightly lit building before her. She had never set foot in places like this, had never even dared to walk past them for fear security would chase her away. Marco led mother and son up to the 15th floor via a private elevator. When the apartment door opened, Amara felt as if she had stepped into a dream. The apartment was 5 times larger than the place she had lived in, with high ceilings and large glass windows overlooking Lake Michigan shimmering beneath the city lights. Polished wooden floors, cream-colored leather sofas, a marble dining table, an open kitchen fully equipped with modern appliances. There were 2 bedrooms, a large one for Amara and a smaller one decorated with cartoon wallpaper, clearly meant for a child. In Jaden's room there was a race car-shaped bed, a shelf filled with new toys, and a small study corner with a child-sized desk and chair. Amara gently laid her sleeping son on the new bed, tucked him in, and stood there watching Jaden's innocent face under the soft glow of the nightlight. Tears spilled freely down her cheeks. For 4 years, she had done everything she could to give her son a good life. Yet all she had been able to offer Jaden was a damp room, meager meals, and a mother who was always absent because she had to work 2 jobs. And now, in the span of a single day, their lives had completely changed. Amara stepped into the living room, where Marco was waiting. He handed her a new phone and a bank card. He said the boss instructed you to use these. Your old phone might be monitored. The bank card has money for your expenses for now. You don't need to work anymore. Focus on our plan. Amara held the card, staring at it as if it were an object from another planet. She was used to counting every single coin, used to choosing between buying milk for her son or medicine for her mother, used to skipping breakfast to save money. And now someone was telling her she didn't have to worry about money anymore. Was it real, or was it just a dream she would wake from to find herself still lying on the worn-out bed in her damp apartment? "You need to rest," Marco said, his voice still cold but no longer frightening. "Tomorrow there will be a lot to do. Nina will come to teach you how to use recording and tracking devices, and the boss wants to meet you in the afternoon to discuss the detailed plan." Amara nodded. When Marco left and the apartment door closed, she stood alone in the unfamiliar yet warm space, feeling as though she had just stepped through a gate into a completely different world. She didn't know what awaited her ahead. She didn't know whether she was making the right decision. But for the first time in 4 years, she felt that she was no longer alone in this fight. 3 days after moving into the new apartment, Amara slowly began to adjust to a life completely different from the one she had known before. She no longer had to wake up at 3:30 in the morning, no longer had to run herself ragged between 2 jobs, no longer had to count every single coin to see if she had enough money to buy milk for her child. Jaden adapted with surprising ease. The boy was enchanted by his new room, by the race car bed and the shelves overflowing with toys. Every morning when he woke up, he would ask his mother whether this was a princess's house, why their home was so beautiful. Amara could only smile and pull him into her arms, not knowing how to explain any of it. That afternoon, while Amara was preparing lunch for Jaden in the kitchen, the doorbell rang. She wiped her hands on her apron, went to open the door, and froze when she saw Roman Castellano standing on the threshold. He was dressed in his usual black suit, but this time, there was no Marco or anyone else with him. His gray eyes passed over Amara and then glanced into the apartment. He said in his familiar low voice that he had come to check whether she had settled in. Amara was about to invite him inside when a small figure darted past her. Jaden, with his messy curls and wide round eyes, stood right in front of Roman, looking up at the tall man with open curiosity and no fear at all. He asked who Roman was, said Roman was very tall, asked whether he was a giant or a superhero, then added that his mother had said someone would protect them, asking if Roman was that person. Amara hurried to pull her son back, ready to apologize for his rudeness, but she stopped when she saw the expression on Roman's face. For the first time since meeting him, Amara saw the coldness on that face dissolve, replaced by something she couldn't name, perhaps confusion, or perhaps a distant longing she couldn't understand. Roman slowly knelt down until he was at Jaden's eye level. The gesture looked strangely out of place on a man accustomed to standing at the top of power, looking down on everyone else. Yet in front of this 4-year-old child, he lowered himself without hesitation. He said his name was Roman, his voice noticeably gentler than usual. He said he wasn't a giant and wasn't a superhero either, but that he would protect Jaden and his mother, and that he promised. Jaden tilted his head, studying Roman with clear eyes as if deciding whether this man could be trusted. Then suddenly the boy broke into a grin, revealing a row of baby teeth with one missing. He said he liked Uncle Roman and asked if Roman wanted to see his room, proudly mentioning his race car bed and how nice it was. Without waiting for an answer, Jaden grabbed Roman's hand, pulled the man to his feet, and dragged him toward his bedroom. Amara stood there, watching the most feared mafia boss in Chicago being led away by a 4-year-old child, and she didn't know whether she should laugh or cry. From Jaden's room, she heard her son's excited chatter, describing every toy, every picture on the wall, every cartoon character on the wallpaper. And from time to time, she heard Roman's low voice responding, brief and restrained, but no longer cold. When Roman finally came out of Jaden's room 15 minutes later, the boy followed closely behind, holding a small toy car and insisting on giving it to Uncle Roman. Roman took the toy, looked at it for a moment, then slipped it into the pocket of his expensive suit without a word. But Amara saw the corner of his mouth lift slightly, just a little, something she never thought she would witness. When Roman left, he paused at the door and said to Amara, in a voice that was still low but somehow different, that Jaden was a good child and that she had raised him very well. Then he stepped into the elevator and disappeared. Amara watched him go, her heart beating in a strange, unfamiliar rhythm she couldn't explain. 1 week later, the plan began to move. Nina arrived at the apartment in the morning carrying a small case filled with technology. She sat at the table, opened the case, and began guiding Amara through each item. A tiny shirt button was actually a highly sensitive audio recorder capable of capturing sound within a 10-meter radius. A simple hairpin was a miniature camera that could record high-resolution video. A slim bracelet was a GPS tracking device so Roman and his team could monitor her location at all times. Amara listened carefully, memorizing every detail. She knew this wasn't a game. One small mistake could cost her life, or worse, could leave Jaden without a mother. But there was no turning back. She had chosen this path and she would see it through. The 5th day of the month arrived. It was payment day, a day Amara had never missed in 4 years. She put on the worn clothes she always wore when visiting her in-laws, fastened the recording button in place, slipped on the GPS bracelet, and hid the camera hairpin inside her handbag. Looking at herself in the mirror, she saw a tired, resigned, pitiful woman. That was exactly the image she needed them to see. Marco drove her to the Parkview building but stopped 2 blocks away to avoid suspicion. From a parked van nearby, Roman and Nina were monitoring her through the live feed. Roman's voice came through the tiny earpiece Amara was wearing. She just needed to go in, hand over the money, talk as usual, stay as long as possible and listen to everything. If there was any sign of danger, she was to say the words "Jaden misses his grandparents," and they would come in immediately. Amara nodded even though she knew he couldn't see her. She entered the building and climbed the familiar 5 flights of stairs. The damp smell, the radio playing on the 1st floor, the burnt beans scent on the 2nd floor. Everything was exactly the same, but this time, everything was different. This time, she was no longer a naive prey. She knocked on the door of apartment 504. 3 clear knocks, just like always. Slippers shuffled inside, the lock clicked open. Ruth appeared in the narrow doorway, her sharp eyes scanning Amara as if checking for anything unusual. Amara forced her face to remain calm, even shaping a tired smile. She greeted her mother-in-law and said she had come to bring this month's money. Ruth said nothing, only extended her hand through the gap. Amara pulled the envelope from her bag and handed it over. Ruth snatched it just as she had every other time and slipped it into her pocket without even counting it. Amara asked softly whether her father-in-law was doing well, deliberately letting worry weaken her voice. She added that Jaden missed his grandparents and had been asking why they never came to see him. Ruth snorted, her voice cold. She said the boy's grandfather still had leg pain and struggled to walk, and that she herself had constant headaches. Children were noisy, she said, and they couldn't handle it. Amara nodded, swallowing the anger boiling inside her. She knew Harold walked just fine. She had seen it on the video. It was all an act. She said she understood and told Ruth to take care of her health. She turned to leave when Ruth suddenly asked where she had moved to, saying she had tried calling her a few days earlier and couldn't reach her. Amara flinched but recovered quickly. She said she was staying with a friend for a while because the old apartment had plumbing issues and needed repairs. Ruth studied her with narrowed eyes, full of suspicion. Amara felt that gaze like blades piercing straight through her. But she didn't waver. She had played this role for 4 years. A few more minutes were nothing. Ruth said to remember to give the new address so they could stay in touch, her tone devoid of real concern. Amara said yes and told her mother-in-law goodbye. She turned and walked away, At the stairwell, she heard the apartment door close and the lock slide into place. She let out a quiet breath and moved quickly down the stairs. The recording device had captured the entire conversation. It wasn't much, but it was enough to confirm that Ruth was still playing her part. When she reached the car, Amara slid into the back seat and removed the earpiece. Roman's voice came through the phone. He told her she had done well. The next step, he said, was to start tracking Trevor Holt. Over the following days, Roman concentrated all his resources on tracking Trevor Holt. He deployed a 5-person team equipped with the most advanced surveillance technology, rotating shifts to shadow every movement of the criminal. Nina remained in the control room at Castellano Tower, monitoring the GPS signal from Trevor's vehicle and analyzing every piece of data they collected. Amara was allowed into the control room to follow the progress. She sat beside Nina, eyes fixed on the screens, her heart pounding every time Trevor moved to a new location. She was no longer a weak widow standing on the sidelines. She was part of the hunt now, and she wouldn't stop until she found Derek. After 5 days of continuous surveillance, a pattern began to emerge. Every Tuesday and Saturday night, Trevor drove out of Chicago, heading south on the interstate highway. He traveled for about an hour and a half, entered an abandoned industrial zone in the city of Gary, Indiana, and stopped in front of an old warehouse standing alone in a weed-choked empty lot. He carried large bags inside, stayed for roughly 1 to 2 hours, then returned to Chicago. Nina zoomed in on the satellite image of the area. The warehouse looked as if it had been abandoned for years, its red brick walls stained and crumbling, the corrugated metal roof rusted through, no lights or signs of life around it. But on the nights Trevor arrived, a faint glow leaked through the cracks of the door, proof that someone was inside. Roman stood behind Amara, his voice firm and absolute. That's where Derek is hiding. Trevor is bringing him supplies. Food, clothes, cigarettes, alcohol. He's living like a rat in a hole, hiding from the outside world. Amara stared at the image of the warehouse on the screen, her emotions churning like a violent storm. For 4 years, while she worked herself to exhaustion to repay his so-called debt, while she cried herself dry in front of a fake urn, Derek had been living in that hole, drinking and laughing at her innocence. She wanted to scream. She wanted to smash everything in sight. But she didn't. She simply sat there, fists clenched tight, and asked in a voice as cold as ice when they were going to act. Roman looked at her, a flicker of something like approval flashing in his gray eyes. This Saturday night, Trevor will go there as usual. We'll wait until he's inside, then surround the place. I want them both at the same time. Amara stood up and faced Roman. She said she wanted to go with them. Marco, standing in the corner of the room, objected, saying it was too dangerous and that she should stay home with the child. But Amara didn't look at Marco. She locked her gaze on Roman, her voice steady and unshaking. 4 years. 4 years I lived in lies. 4 years I mourned a man who didn't deserve it. I have the right to see his face. I have the right to hear him explain why he betrayed me and our son. Don't take that right away from me. Roman was silent for a long moment. His gray eyes studied her, weighing and judging. Then he nodded. Fine. You come with us, but you follow every order I give. One wrong step and I'll pull you out immediately. Do you understand? Amara nodded. She understood, and she was ready. On Saturday night, the final confrontation would begin. Saturday night arrived faster than Amara expected. At 8 in the evening, after leaving Jaden in the care of one of Roman's most trusted guards, she climbed into the black SUV with Roman, Marco, and 2 other members of the team. She wore black from head to toe at Roman's request, a knit cap pulled low to hide her hair, and the tiny recording device Nina had already installed. Her heart thrashed against her ribs like a trapped bird, but her hands didn't shake. She had waited too long for this moment to let fear stop her now. The vehicle left Chicago after night had fully fallen, heading south on the interstate highway. No one spoke during the drive. Roman sat beside Amara, gray eyes fixed straight ahead, his face cold as ice yet radiating the intense focus of a predator closing in on its prey. Around 9:45, they reached the abandoned industrial zone in Gary. The SUV stopped roughly 200 meters from the warehouse, hidden behind a row of crumbling factory buildings. Roman signaled everyone to exit the vehicle in silence. Darkness swallowed everything, with only the weak sliver of a crescent moon casting light over the weed-choked ground littered with industrial debris. They moved like ghosts, slipping along a rusted fence toward the warehouse. At 10:15, the sound of a motorcycle engine echoed from the distance. Amara held her breath, crouching behind a stack of rusted oil drums, about 20 meters from the warehouse. Roman was right beside her, one hand resting on her shoulder as a silent reassurance. The motorcycle headlight swept across the empty lot, then stopped in front of the warehouse door. The man dismounted and removed his helmet. It was Trevor Holt, exactly as Amara had seen in the videos. He carried 2 large bags, walked to the door, and kicked it 3 times in a specific pattern. Hard, light, hard. The warehouse door slowly slid open with a piercing creak. Weak yellow light spilled out from inside, and a figure appeared. Amara's breath caught in her throat. Even though she had prepared herself, even though she already knew the truth, seeing Derek standing there in flesh and bone felt like a fist slamming straight into her chest. He was much thinner than 4 years ago, unshaven, hair long and messy, wearing a filthy tank top and shorts, but it was unmistakably him, the familiar limp, the slight hitch in his shoulders, the way he tilted his head when he spoke. The man she had loved, married, borne a child for, mourned for 4 years, was standing less than 20 meters away, completely unaware of her presence. Roman signaled the team to move closer. They found a crack in the warehouse wall just wide enough to see inside and hear the conversation. Amara pressed her eye to the gap, her heart racing wildly. Inside, the warehouse was a chaotic space with an old mattress on the floor, a rusted fan, a small television, and countless empty beer cans scattered everywhere. Derek and Trevor sat on 2 plastic chairs, opened beers, and began to talk. The recording device on Amara captured every word with stunning clarity. Derek asked whether Trevor had brought everything, his voice hoarse and sharp. Trevor replied that he had beer, food, cigarettes, new clothes, joking that Derek was living like a king. Trevor tossed him a pack of cigarettes. Derek lit one, took a long drag, and exhaled gray smoke. He complained that the place was hot as hell, and the mosquitoes bit all night, saying he was going crazy. Trevor told him to hang on a little longer, saying his wife was almost done paying off the debt, and after that his parents would have a decent sum and Derek could disappear to Mexico. Amara clenched her teeth when she heard that. Derek laughed, a dry, contemptuous sound. He called her a fool, saying 4 years had passed and she never missed a payment, that he almost admired how hard she worked, and that his parents acted well, crying and playing the victims while she swallowed it all. Trevor asked why Derek had left such a gentle wife. Derek was silent for a moment, then shrugged indifferently. He said he owed $60,000 in Detroit and would have been killed if he hadn't faked his death, and that the $14,000 debt his parents invented was his mother's idea, saying they should use Amara while they could, that she was naive, easy to manipulate, and hardworking, and if they didn't take her money, whose would they take? Tears streamed down Amara's cheeks, but she didn't wipe them away. She let them fall, letting the pain burn away whatever weakness remained in her. Trevor asked about Derek's son, asking if he missed him. Derek was silent longer this time. He took another drag of his cigarette, then spoke in a cold, flat voice that made Amara want to tear him apart with her bare hands. He said to forget the kid, that he never wanted a child, that Amara got pregnant on her own, that he didn't choose it, that she was young and pretty and would find someone else to take care of her and the boy, and that he needed to take care of himself first. Roman tightened his grip on Amara's shoulder. She understood. It was enough. There was enough evidence now. She pulled her eye away from the crack, wiped her tears with the back of her hand, and looked at Roman. In the darkness, his gray eyes burned with a fury she had never seen before. Not because he cared for her, but perhaps because he despised betrayal and cowardice more than anything else in the world. "It's time," Roman said, his voice cold as a blade. "We're going in." Everything happened like a violent whirlwind. Roman signaled with his hand, and his team moved like shadows in the night. 2 men in black blocked the rear exit of the warehouse. Marco swept around to the right, while Roman led straight toward the front door. Amara was ordered to stay back, but she moved forward anyway, keeping just enough distance to see everything. She couldn't stand aside in this moment. She needed to see Derek's face when he was taken. She needed to witness the collapse of the man who had betrayed her. Roman didn't knock. He kicked the metal door with terrifying force, blasting it open and slamming it against the wall with a deafening crash. Derek and Trevor were sitting and drinking beer, completely unprepared. Trevor lunged toward a bag containing a gun in the corner, but Marco was faster. A single gunshot rang out. The bag flew across the room, and Marco was already in front of Trevor with a pistol aimed straight at his head. "Move and you're dead," Marco said, his voice cold as ice. Trevor raised both hands, his face drained of color. Derek was different. He didn't try to run or fight. He just stood there, eyes wide with horror as he saw Roman Castellano step into the warehouse. Anyone who lived in Chicago knew the face of the king of the night. Anyone who did business in the underworld knew the name Castellano. Derek understood instantly that he was finished. "Castellano," he whispered, his voice shaking. Why are you—" Roman didn't answer. He simply stood there, steel-gray eyes fixed on Derek with undisguised contempt. Then he stepped aside, revealing Amara standing just behind him. Derek saw her. And for the first time that night, Amara saw real fear on the face of the man who had once been her husband. Not fear of Roman, not fear of death, but fear of being exposed, fear of being seen through, fear of the woman he had deceived for 4 years now standing before him with eyes that held not a single tear. "Amara," Derek stammered, his face twisting. What are you doing here?" 4 years. Amara cut him off, her voice so cold she barely recognized it as her own. 4 years you faked your death. 4 years I cried in front of an empty urn. 4 years I worked myself to exhaustion to repay a debt that never existed. 4 years our son grew up without a father. She stepped closer, each step steady, as if she were walking a path she had been preparing for her entire life. Derek backed away until his spine hit the wall, trapped. "Let me explain," he pleaded. "I had reasons. I was afraid the Detroit guys would kill me. I had to fake my death to protect you and the kid." "Protect us!" Amara laughed, a bitter sound echoing through the filthy warehouse. "You call that protection? You took my money. You let your parents scam me. You watched me and our son live in poverty while you sat here drinking beer and mocking my innocence. That's protection." Derek couldn't speak. He stood there trembling like a stray dog cornered with nowhere to run. All the confidence, the cruelty, the contempt he'd shown while talking to Trevor minutes earlier had vanished. In front of Amara, he was nothing but a coward, a liar, a pathetic traitor. "I heard everything," Amara said, her voice shaking now, not with fear but with the fury boiling inside her. "I heard you say you never wanted a child. I heard you say, forget Jaden. I heard you call me naive and easy to fool. I heard it all, Derek." Tears streamed down her face, and she didn't wipe them away. She let them fall so Derek could see, so he would know how much pain he had caused her. "Jaden asks me about you," she continued. "He asks why his father went away and never came back. He asks why his grandparents don't love him. I have to lie to my child every single day. I have to make up beautiful stories about a heroic father who sacrificed himself for his family, while the truth is his father has been hiding in this rat hole and never cared about him at all." Derek dropped to his knees, hands clasped together in a desperate plea. "Amara, please. I was wrong. I know I was wrong. Give me one chance. I'll change. Shut up." Roman spoke for the first time since the confrontation began. His voice was cold, absolute, impossible to challenge. "You don't deserve to speak to her. You don't deserve to beg. You're nothing but vermin, and vermin have no right to ask for anything." Derek looked at Roman, then at Amara, then back at Roman. He understood. He understood that the woman he had once despised, deceived, and abandoned was now standing beside the most powerful mafia boss in Chicago, and he, her former husband, was nothing more than prey waiting to be dealt with. Marco bound Derek's and Trevor's hands with plastic ties. The 2 criminals were dragged outside and thrown into a waiting truck. Amara stood there watching Derek being taken away, saying nothing more. She had said enough. She had seen enough. And now, she had to decide the fate of the man who had once been her husband. They returned to Chicago in the middle of the night. Derek and Trevor were locked inside a secret basement owned by Roman, and guarded around the clock by his most loyal men. Amara didn't go back to the apartment right away, but followed Roman to Castellano Tower, up to the 52nd floor, where she sat in the familiar leather chair in his office. She needed time to absorb everything that had just happened, and to think about what came next. Roman poured 2 glasses of whiskey and set one in front of her, and this time she didn't refuse. She took a small sip, feeling the burn slide down her throat like a thin line of fire that grounded her and reminded her she was still alive. Roman sat across from her in silence, gray eyes fixed on her face, waiting. Finally, Amara spoke in a hoarse, exhausted voice and asked what would happen now and what he planned to do with them. Roman leaned back, fingers interlaced, and told her that was exactly why he'd brought her there, because the decision belonged to her, not him. He explained calmly that she had 2 options. The first was handing Derek and Trevor over to the police, since there was enough evidence from the recordings, security footage, urn analysis, and financial records to charge Derek with organized fraud, falsified documents, and complicity in loan sharking for 10 to 15 years in prison. Trevor with up to 20 years as the ringleader, and Derek's parents as accomplices, likely facing probation and repayment due to their age. Then he outlined the second option, in which he would handle it his way, and Derek and Trevor would disappear permanently, with no bodies, no questions, full financial restitution to Amara plus compensation, and the same fate available for Derek's parents if she wanted, clean and silent with no courts or media. Amara fell silent. Understanding the second option meant Derek's death. A part of her burned with betrayal and wanted to agree instantly, but Jaden's innocent face appeared in her mind. Her 5-year-old son who still asked about his father and drew pictures of their family. She knew that one day he would ask what happened, and she'd have to live with that answer. Amara took a deep breath, met Roman's gaze, and chose the first option, asking him to turn Derek over to the police. She acknowledged that trials and public exposure would follow, but insisted she wanted Derek to live in prison and suffer day after day as she had suffered for 4 years, because death was too easy. She wanted to be able to tell her son one day that she chose justice over revenge and didn't become a killer, even if his father deserved it. After a long moment, Roman nodded slowly with unmistakable respect and agreed to do it her way. That very night, Roman contacted a police inspector he had a long-standing connection with, not through bribery but through mutual respect between two men standing on opposite sides of the law. With the evidence Roman provided, the police moved quickly. Derek and Trevor were handed over to law enforcement the following morning, while another police unit was dispatched to apartment 504 to arrest Harold and Ruth Thompson. Amara asked to be present. Roman didn't object. He simply sent Marco with her to ensure her safety. When Amara arrived at the Parkview building at 6 a.m, the police had already surrounded the 5th floor. She stood in the hallway and watched as 2 officers knocked on the door of apartment 504 and announced they had an arrest warrant. Ruth's screams erupted from inside, followed by banging, crying, and chaos. Then the steel door was forced open, and the 2 elderly figures were led out in handcuffs. Harold looked as though he had aged 20 years overnight. He no longer pretended to be sick, yet now he truly looked like a man on the brink of death, eyes sunken, face pale, body trembling uncontrollably. He said nothing, only lowered his head and allowed the officers to lead him away like a walking corpse. Ruth was different. The moment she saw Amara standing in the hallway, hatred ignited in her eyes. She tore herself from the officer's grip and lunged toward Amara like a rabid animal, screaming the most vicious curses. She shouted that Amara had destroyed her son, destroyed her entire family, calling her a poisonous snake, an ungrateful traitor, swearing that Amara and her little boy would never know peace. The officers quickly restrained Ruth and dragged her away, but Amara didn't step back. She stood her ground, looking straight into the eyes of the woman she had called mother for 4 years, and for the first time she saw Ruth's true face. There was no fake frailty left, no sickly complaints, no pitying gaze toward an easy victim, only the raw hatred of someone exposed. Amara said calmly, despite the storm raging inside her, that she hadn't harmed anyone. She had only uncovered the truth they had hidden for 4 years, that Derek was alive, that they had helped him deceive her, that every dollar she sent them was paid with her blood and tears, while they sat counting money and mocking her trust. Ruth fell silent, though the hatred in her eyes remained. Amara stepped closer and spoke again, her voice trembling with emotion, but not weakness, telling her that for 4 years she had called them mother and father, treated them as her own family, hoping every month to be invited inside, to share a cup of tea, to be treated like kin, yet they had never let her cross the threshold, never asked if she was tired or well or needed anything, only snatched the envelope and slammed the door in her face. Tears slid down Amara's cheeks, and she didn't wipe them away, letting Ruth see that she could still feel pain, could still grieve after such betrayal. She said Jaden asked her constantly why his grandparents didn't love him, whether he had done something wrong, and she had lied every day, telling him they were sick and weak and couldn't walk, when the truth was they didn't want to see their grandson for fear he would uncover their secret. They had abandoned him, just as Derek had. Ruth opened her mouth to speak, but Amara didn't allow it. She said she once believed that no matter what, they were still Jaden's grandparents, that once the debt was paid, she would bring Jaden to stay with them, so he could have memories of his paternal family But now she understood they didn't deserve to be his grandparents, didn't deserve to be called that. And from now on, Jaden would never have to know they even existed. Ruth screamed in rage as the officers dragged her away. Harold had already been taken to the car. Amara stood there watching the two elderly figures disappear from the building, feeling a crushing weight lift from her shoulders. For 4 years she had tried to be a good daughter-in-law, a good mother, a good wife, sacrificing everything for a family that never deserved her. Now the performance was over, and for the first time in 4 years, she was finally free. 1 week after Harold and Ruth were arrested, everything slowly began to settle. Derek was awaiting trial in detention. Trevor was held in solitary confinement as the leader of the criminal network, and Derek's parents were released on bail but placed under house arrest and forbidden to leave the city. Lawyers were working, files were being finalized, and the trial was scheduled to begin within 3 months. Amara remained in the apartment Roman had arranged for her and Jaden. She offered to pay rent, but Roman refused. She offered to return the bank card, but Roman told her to keep it until she found a new job. She didn't understand why he was being so kind to her. In the Mafia world, no one did anything without a purpose, yet Roman seemed to ask nothing of her in return. One evening, after Jaden had fallen sound asleep, the doorbell rang. Amara opened the door and found Roman standing there alone, without Marco or anyone else. He was still wearing his black suit as always, but he looked more tired, his gray eyes no longer as sharp and cold as the first day she met him. He asked if she minded if he came in and sat for a while. Amara stepped aside and invited him in. They sat across from each other in the living room. Amara on the sofa, Roman in the armchair. Neither of them spoke for the first few minutes. Amara didn't know how to begin, and Roman seemed lost in his own thoughts. Finally, Amara broke the silence and said softly, with genuine curiosity, that she still didn't understand why he had helped her. She said he claimed he wanted to dismantle Trevor Holt's operation, but he could have done that without her, since he had the power, the people, and the money, and she asked why he would spend so much time and effort helping a widow who had nothing. Roman didn't answer right away. He looked out the window at the city lights shimmering in the darkness and remained silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower and gentler, as if he were speaking to himself rather than to her. He told her that his mother had once been a woman like her, that she married his father very young and gave birth to him when she was only 20. His father was a gambler, an alcoholic, a useless man who only knew how to waste money and beat his family. When Roman was 5, his father left with another woman, leaving his mother buried in debt with a small child. Amara listened without interrupting, sensing the pain hidden in every word. Roman said his mother worked day and night to raise him, cleaning buildings, working in kitchens, doing housework, any job that paid. She never complained and never gave up. She sacrificed everything so he could go to school, eat enough, and stay warm. She died when he was 16, exhausted from working too hard and unable to afford medical treatment. Roman turned back to look at Amara, and for the first time she saw something in his gray eyes that wasn't cruelty or power, but the grief of a child who had lost his mother. A wound buried for years but never healed. He said that when he saw Amara on the security cameras, climbing 5 flights of stairs every month to deliver money to people who were deceiving her, he saw his mother. He saw a woman who endured and sacrificed everything for the people she loved, and he told himself that if there was anything he could do to help her, he would, because he couldn't save his own mother, but maybe he could save another woman. Tears welled in Amara's eyes. She never imagined that behind Roman's cold and ruthless exterior was a story so painful, or that his reason for helping her was so simple and sincere. She told him she was sorry about his mother and said she must have been an incredible woman. Roman nodded, a rare and gentle gesture, and said she was the greatest person he had ever known, and that Amara reminded him of her every day. They sat there in silence, but it was no longer the distant silence of strangers. It was the quiet of two people who had shared something deeply human, who had seen each other not through armor and titles but through hidden wounds. And in that moment, Amara knew that what existed between her and Roman had changed. No longer just an agreement between a widow and a mafia boss, but something else, something she wasn't yet ready to name. 3 months later, the trial of Derek Thompson and his accomplices officially took place at the federal courthouse in Chicago, drawing intense attention from local media, not only because of the severity of the crimes but also because of the dramatic story behind them. A husband who faked his own death to escape debt, a wife deceived for 4 long years, and a loan sharking and money laundering operation finally brought into the light, something the press quickly labeled the case of the year. Amara sat in the witness row wearing a simple black dress, her hair neatly pinned back, her expression calm like the surface of a quiet autumn lake. No longer the exhausted and submissive woman she had been 4 years earlier, but someone changed, stronger. Someone who had learned to straighten her back and meet the eyes of those who betrayed her. Sitting directly behind her like an unshakable wall was Roman Castellano. He said nothing and did nothing. He was simply there, and his presence alone was enough to give her a sense of safety. The trial lasted 5 days, with an overwhelming amount of evidence presented. The audio recording of Derek and Trevor's conversation in the warehouse was played in court, leaving the courtroom in stunned silence as Derek's voice was heard saying he didn't care about his son and that his wife was an idiot who was easy to deceive. Security camera footage showed Derek entering and leaving his parents' apartment night after night for 4 years. The forensic analysis of the urn confirmed it contained nothing but sand and crushed stone. Financial records exposed millions of dollars in dirty money laundered through shell businesses. Derek sat at the defendant's table with his head bowed, unable to look at anyone, shrinking into himself as the prosecutor read the charges. And when the recording was played, he cried, though Amara knew those weren't tears of remorse, but of fear at finally being held accountable. Trevor Holt sat beside him with a blank expression, a seasoned criminal accustomed to courtrooms and convictions, fully aware he was going to prison and accepting it as part of the game. Harold and Ruth Thompson sat at a separate table for secondary defendants. Harold looked like a man already dead, his eyes empty and unfocused, while Ruth clung stubbornly to her defiance, occasionally casting hateful glances at Amara, but no longer daring to speak. On the 5th day, the judge delivered the final verdict. Derek Thompson was found guilty of organized fraud, falsifying documents, and being an accomplice in a loan sharking operation, and was sentenced to 12 years in prison. Trevor Holt was found guilty of running a loan sharking and money laundering ring, and received a sentence of 15 years. Harold and Ruth Thompson were found guilty as accomplices to fraud, but due to their age and lack of prior convictions, they received suspended sentences with 5 years of probation, and were ordered to repay every dollar they had taken from Amara. When the judge struck the gavel to close the case, Amara stood up and looked at Derek one last time. He was looking at her too, eyes red, lips trembling as if he wanted to say something, but Amara didn't need to hear it. She'd heard enough. She turned and walked out of the courtroom without looking back. Outside, the Chicago sky was clear and bright with golden sunlight. Amara took a deep breath, felt the cool breeze against her face, and for the first time in 4 years, she truly felt free. 1 year after the trial, Amara's life had changed in ways she never dared to dream of, and she no longer had to wake up at 3:30 in the morning to scrub floors, no longer had to race between 2 jobs just to survive, no longer had to count coins to see if there was enough to buy milk for her child. She had found a new job at a real estate company owned by the Castellano family, working as an administrative assistant with a salary 3 times higher than her old income. Marco had arranged the position without her knowing, and when she found out, she tried to refuse. But Roman told her she deserved the job because of her abilities, not because of any favor, and she believed him. Her mother, Gloria, had undergone successful heart surgery, and although Amara never knew who paid for the entire procedure, she suspected it was Roman. And when she asked him, he simply shrugged and said that some things didn't require knowing who did them, only knowing that they were done. Gloria was now much healthier and living with Amara and Jaden in a new, bright, spacious apartment in Lincoln Park. Not the one Roman had arranged at the beginning, but a home Amara bought herself using the compensation from the case and savings from her new job because she wanted to stand on her own feet, and Roman respected that. Jaden was now 5 years old, attending 1st grade at a good elementary school nearby, cheerful and healthy, and he no longer asked about his father or his paternal grandparents. Amara had explained to him in the simplest words that his father had done wrong things and had to take responsibility, and although Jaden didn't fully understand, he accepted it, because children have an extraordinary ability to adapt, and Jaden proved that every day. As for Roman, he was still the most powerful mafia boss in Chicago, still cold to the outside world, still ruthless to his enemies, still the king of the night everyone feared. But with Amara and Jaden, he was different. He visited them every week, sometimes bringing gifts for Jaden, sometimes simply sitting with Amara over coffee and talking about ordinary things. Jaden called him Uncle Roman and clung to him as if they had known each other forever, always asking him to build blocks together, to watch cartoons, or proudly showing him every drawing he made at school. And Roman, the man the entire city feared, always patiently sat down and did everything the child asked. One late autumn afternoon, Amara picked Jaden up from school as usual, and as they stepped out of the gate, she saw the familiar black car parked by the curb and Roman standing beside it, holding a bouquet of red roses and a toy box. Jaden squealed with joy and ran straight to him, and Roman bent down, lifted the boy into his arms, and spun him around, making Jaden laugh out loud, while Amara walked closer, watching the scene with a warm heart. She once thought that after everything that happened, she'd never trust a man again, that her heart had frozen forever, but Roman proved her wrong. He wasn't perfect. He was Mafia, a criminal, a man who'd done things she didn't want to know about, but he was also the man who stood by her when she needed someone most, who protected her and her son, and who showed her that there were still men in this world who kept their promises. "Uncle Roman, did you come to pick us up?" Jaden asked with sparkling eyes. "Yes, I came to pick you and your mom up," Roman replied, then looked at Amara with gray eyes softer than she'd ever seen. Amara smiled, the first truly radiant smile she'd had in years. She didn't know what the future held, or where her relationship with Roman would lead, but she knew she wasn't afraid anymore. She'd walked through hell, faced the cruelest betrayal, and she was still standing, still strong, still able to love and be loved. The painful past had closed behind prison doors, and ahead of her was a new road, imperfect and uncertain. But she wasn't walking it alone anymore. And with Roman beside her, she knew she was strong enough to face anything. This story has come to an end, but the lesson it leaves behind remains. Life will sometimes strike us with its cruelest blows from the very people we love and trust most. But what matters isn't how many times we're knocked down, it's how many times we stand back up. Amara was betrayed, deceived, drained of strength and trust, but she didn't fall. She fought, uncovered the truth, and reclaimed justice for herself, proving that a woman, no matter how fragile she may seem, can become strong when she has a reason to fight. If you're going through hardships, if you feel betrayed or abandoned, remember that darkness doesn't last forever. After every storm comes clear skies. After every long night comes a radiant dawn. So never give up on yourself. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel, like and share this video so more people can hear meaningful stories every day. How did this story make you feel? And did it remind you of anything in your own life? Because we truly want to hear what's in your heart. So leave a comment below and let's share and connect together. We wish everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peace each day. Thank you for staying with us throughout this story. Goodbye, and see you again in the next video.